All right, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's discussion with Shamim Momin. Shamim, you are a rapidly rising, maybe you've already risen, star in the art curatorial field, which leads me to ask a whole slew of questions. But let's start at the beginning. Where were you raised?
I was born in Manhattan, actually. My parents are both foreign. My dad was from India, and my mom's from France. They met in the city, and I was born there. But all of my family is actually in other countries.
Where were you raised?
Right, our family's house is right outside Manhattan, so there pretty much. I went to schools in New England throughout my youth and college as well, actually.
When did you? So many people think that they wanted to grow up to be artists. At least, in this course, the experts we interviewed. Did you, or did you? Was art? How did art?
Actually, no. I initially wanted to be a scientist. I was actually kind of pretty set on wanting to be either a physicist or a biologist when I was in high school. And as it happened, I took an art history course. Just, as one of my electives when I was a junior in college, in high school, and just completely changed my mind about what I wanted to do at that moment, because, art history was just suddenly all of the things, a way to think about everything in the world, everything about humanness. You can think about science, you can think about aesthetics, you can think about philosophy. There's so many elements to the history of art that just seems so exciting to me to be able to think on such a broad spectrum. So that's actually when I decided to go to Williams College, was actually for the art history program.
So you went to a school with a whole hell of a lot of tradition in art history, and I bet you more museum directors have come out of one class of Williams than any other school in total.
Apparently so, yeah. I knew that when I chose to go there, but not so much because of the directors, just because the art history program was so well known, and it seemed such a great way to concentrate, that experience. It's an interesting college. I was actually just there for the Creative Capital Conference this past week, and I forget what a strange concentration of culture it is in the middle of nowhere. There are amazing museums, the Clark and the Williams College Museum, and Mass MoCA now, and other like Tanglewood, and the Williamstown Theater Festival, and so many amazing things in this very small mountain town, and which allowed for a very involved investment in what you were doing in a way that I think would be different at a larger university, to be honest.
If you guys if you take a look at Williams and look up, Williams is the name of the college, and look up Williams Mafia, and maybe Williams Art Mafia, I think, Shamim probably can correct me, but I think the story goes is that there were a bunch of friends who needed an easy elective and took a college art class and were blown away. This is like in the early 60s, I think. And we're blown away.
It's actually better than that, Paul. It's one of these football players, it actually was, because it was a boys' school at the time only, took an art history class and had a great aptitude for it, apparently. So then the professor, Whitney Stoddard, is kind of a legendary art historian in his own right. He would go to the frat parties and try to recruit like football player dudes, essentially, to be part of the art history program. And because it's not a university, no one is at Williams for. You have to have the academics. You can't be there on like a sports scholarship or anything like that. So they were all very smart guys, but they just happened to not be, they were traditional thought of like art history students. So that's actually how they built the program initially. And you can see that kind of in a lot of the professionals that have come out of it. Kurt Varnajo or Tom Krenz, and Michael Govan even still has a bit of that feel to him.
Yeah.
So, and there's plenty of others, of course, but those are maybe the ones that you might know most.
Yeah, well, James Woods and Rusty Powell.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're forgetting others. That's really cool. All right, so you majored in art.
Mm-hmm.
And then did you get a graduate degree?
I never actually finished it. The way it went for me is I lived in Paris for my junior year, and when I got back, I went to the College Museum, which is a great place, really has a wonderful collection, and I mean, really, when you're an art history major, you spend most of your time your classes are actually in the museum most of the time with the actual artwork, which is pretty extraordinary in experience. But in any case, I went to the director, Linda Shearer, at the time and asked if she would let me work there for the summer before my senior year started. And that was how I actually discovered the idea of curatorial work. I mean, I thought I was going to be an academic, but then I realized that this would allow me the opportunity to, one, keep doing new projects and new things, which works well for me because I get impatient very quickly, but it would still, keep me involved in the academic side and the intellectual aspects of thinking about art, but something more active that could be about communication and audience connection as well as
so
art.
How did you go from academia to the museum world?
Well, I mean, honestly, I was like, when I got back from Paris, I had been working for, while I was finishing my coursework, I was also working for Frank Costella's daughter, who lives in Paris, and that's how I started thinking about sort of the more sort of practical, what was I going to do notion when I left. And then, so when I got back and I went to the College Museum and talked to the director, she suggested I, try out the curatorial area. Again, because it is a university town, it's opportunities like that you could, like literally I had just walked into her office and asked if she could find a way for me to learn something there. I mean, it was unpaid, obviously, but still, for me, that was still pretty exciting. You were able to do that. So then, by the time that senior year started, I knew that the direction I wanted to go to museum, to stay working in museums. And I started, when I graduated, I went to the Whitney Independent Study, ISP. Some of you might be familiar with that, but it's not as well known as it used to be, but it's a pretty important program in that developed I think it was established in 1968, in that it combined curatorial practice, artists, like living, working artists, and critics have to all work together in these seminars and also in their project areas. So it was, at the time, pretty radical. There's a lot of programs now that do similar things. But so I did the Whitney Independent Study directly out of college. And then I was hired at the Whitney before that was finished. So when I started my graduate degree, I went to the PhD program at CUNY, in part because they were very flexible, as well as there were some really interesting professors there. But because I was doing it while working full time, at the point at which I was almost ABD, all dissertation, finishing all my coursework, I was offered to co-curate the 2004 biennial. And I asked to take a leave of absence from coursework in order to do that.
Seems fair.
I'm sorry?
Seems fair.
Yeah, right. But at that point, I had taken, so many semesters with lighter course because I just couldn't handle more than 2 classes a semester on top of work, that they said I had to choose between continuing the program or that. And so I think I chose the biennial. And I never went back and finished the PhD. But I kind of don't feel too upset about that, to be honest.
I feel like that's a faster rise than most talented young curators follow. You agree?
I have to say I had, I like to think it's a combination of, I hope, merit, but also some really great mentors who helped me move forward much more quickly than I see happen now. And also, some of it is timing. It happened to be that when I started working with Selma Golden, who's now the director of the Studio Museum in Harlem, and then Adam Weinberg, who's the current Whitney director at the time, was the permanent collection curator, and he sort of poached me from her to work on a big project. The Whitney used to not have a permanent collection on view, and when we transformed the 5th floor into the permanent collection floor, and that was literally the first time in its history there would be like a permanent viewed collection. It was always rotating otherwise. So I was in charge of that project with Adam. And I think these sort of opportunities allowed me to learn really, really quickly things that one might otherwise, just the natural course would be a lot slower. So then when he left, and the new director came in, I was in a very good position to be offered and I still can't believe they did this because I think I was 25 at the time, 24, I can't remember, offered me the job to be the director of the Whitney at Altria, which was our Midtown branch up until about 2008, and where we did all commissioned contemporary projects. So I took that over in 2000. I think that was my first show, was sometime in 2000 there. And yeah, and then so yeah, definitely a series of happenstance, as well as, you know, like I said, I hope I lived up to each moment of those things so that it seemed reasonable to keep pushing me forward.
What does a curator do to distinguish themselves from other co-curators?
I think that if you think about it that way, you probably will end up a bit artificial to me.
Wait, say that again. That broke up a little bit.
I'm sorry. I think if that's the focus, that you're trying to think of a way to make yourself different or be something that someone else isn't, that's not really the way I go about it. I think that can sometimes feel a little bit forced. And for me, what I felt was, you know, I had the opportunity to just jump in and start, like, I mean, my process was to just go see as much as possible, meet as many artists as possible, because my area was immediately then contemporary, and specifically working on these site-specific commission projects. It just felt important to me to start to understand as much as I could about process and development of thinking around projects. And honestly, it was just by having that, I had the charge, I had to do a show every 6 weeks or so. 2 shows in that space, actually, in the main space as well as the gallery. It's just like you had to keep trying things. And I think I had a great privilege to be able to learn my voice by doing it. Not like deciding it in advance, but actually trying, like working with artists and interesting and refining what I thought was interesting about this contemporary scene at that time.
Was most of the decision-making about what would be shown up to you, or did you have to report to Adam and get approval, or how would it work?
No, I mean, everything has to be approved. That's true of all curatorial work at the Whitney. I mean, I'm sure other museums do it differently, right. But I would, you know, again, one of the great privileges of running Altria was that I was able to it was a little bit like running your own alternative space, but with the backing of a major institution in terms of quality and support. Really unique opportunity that way. But yeah, while I shaped the program entirely, of course, I presented to the curatorial committee with every new idea. But because nobody was really competing for that space, because it was just sort of understood whoever was the director at Altria kind of ran that program. There was never, it was just to make sure I wasn't like insane, basically, when I would present, versus the spaces uptown where it was a lot more challenging to get your exhibition approved for those spaces. So for, you know, when I was also uptown, I was in charge of the contemporary series, which was in our lobby gallery. And that was, you know, even while I was overseeing it, I still had to present my shows for that program as much as anyone else, and because I needed it. You couldn't always see me, in other words, for that series.
That was an awful lot of work. Were you also involved with fundraising?
Not as much at the outset. Altria was another great luxury. It had a set budget that could only be used there. So I wasn't competing with the uptown exhibitions for that. And because it was free, and that was just the contract with Philip Morris, essentially. And so that was great, because I didn't have to do anything for that part. For the uptown shows, officially no, but every curator does their own version of fundraising. In other words, you know, working with certain trustees who have interest and sympathy in your particular area, or sometimes supplementing the budget if you can. I often, the thing I was most focused on is getting additional funding for books, because many of the smaller shows for contemporary artists or younger artists weren't always budgeted with a catalog, which I thought was really problematic, because then you end up, by the time the artist gets to the, you know, like their mid-career show or something more substantial, the only writing that's around on them tends to be not well researched, like press and things like repeats of press, and you don't have any substantive academic writing on the beginnings of their development. So that was something I would fundraise for very specifically. I hear now they don't actually let curators do that anymore, but it all has to go to the bottom line. It can't be added on top. But at the time, they let me do it a few times, which was great.
How long were you there in New York with Whitney?
12 years. 12 years. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's funny because it seemed like forever, but I guess I've been out in LA almost 5 years now, 4.5 years. So it's coming up on, catching up on it.
You had no particular affinity for Los Angeles before you moved there.
Oh, no, I did. It was a very specific decision to want to come to Los Angeles. I mean, it was a combination of things, I would say. Like, one, obviously, I'd been at the Whitney for quite a while. I just finished the second biennial that I'd co-curated. I felt like I had done about 50 shows at that point there and outside, and it just seemed like a good moment to consider what other ways I could explore curatorial work. But then, Altria closed, so that was really a bummer because I really liked having that ownership, a bit more ownership there, and being able to develop it as a director, not just as a curator. And I had been going to Los Angeles a lot in the recent years for biennial research as well as other things, and was just really intrigued by the spectrum of artists out here. A lot of the work I was interested in working with that was very process-based and kind of multiple practices, things that are much more familiar to us now, I think, in the general contemporary art world, but that I was particularly interested in, seemed sort of, especially prevalent in Los Angeles. And I was curious about that and why that might be the structure of the city. And then, frankly, the fact that there just wasn't, there aren't still as many institutions as you might imagine out here doing, and in particular, in this case, public art. There wasn't one that was entirely dedicated to the development of contemporary public art. So that, and obviously there are plenty in New York that would have seemed redundant to me. So it was a very particular choice to have it be LA.
Refresh me on the chronology. I mean, did you know that you were going to affiliate with LAND when you moved to LA?
Well, yeah, I mean, I started it, so I moved out here to begin it.
But you did that with a partner.
Yeah, but yes. I came out here with the idea of LAND, and then when I brought it to Christine Kim, who is now an associate curator at LACMA and an old friend of mine from New York as well, I brought it to her with the idea, and we then went into it together. But it was very specifically with the idea of developing this organization that I moved out to Los Angeles. It just hadn't been totally refined, like we didn't have the name, I just had the idea of it.
Why don't you explain what it is?
Oh, sure. Sorry. So LAND is an acronym. It stands for Los Angeles Nomadic Division, which was Christine's brilliant gesture. She came up with the title entirely. And the idea of it is a public art initiative that is all commission art projects with contemporary artists. Once in a while, we have some historical ventures, but by and large, that's the principle of it. It has no one space. It's done in all different kinds of venues and at many different types of scales that we have it strategically play on the different types of scales, but I can explain that in a second. Basically, it's intended to be the same kind of challenging and I think exciting, innovative, contemporary work that I was able to work with at the museum, but into the political realm and free and maybe part of people's experience in a way that is a little more day-to-day than necessarily going to an institution to see it. And then for the artists, I hope giving them the opportunity to work in ways that don't always function as well within the gallery or museum confines. So the idea of kind of like being for both for the audience and also for the art and for the opportunities. So we've done everything from, like, we're just installing actually a big painting show that we did at a former bank downtown. It was all commission works and pretty major installation. We do things that are one-night events that are more performative or sort of laboratory-esque in their nature. The artists can try something out that it might just be on their mind at that time or something I thought was cool. It can be a little more nimble in those those kind of shorter presentations, and then others that are like kind of somewhere in the middle, are ongoing projects that spread through over time and space. So there's a lot of different formats that we work in.
How many exhibits happen a year?
It depends on the year. I mean, this is literally our 4th year of existence, so the pattern is still being established. But on average, I would say we do 1 or 2 of these very large-scale shows. You know, one year we did an 8 artists. I consider it like a thematic exhibition in Marfa, Texas, but it was like 8 discrete projects throughout the town. You know, this year we had this big painting and play show, and then we're also starting a major cross-country billboard project. So those are sort of 1 or 2 of those, either long-term or major, you know, larger scale kind of items. Then, you know, a few of that might be monographic projects or else smaller group shows. So we're doing a project with Chris Haig, a project with Katie Gridden, Ravenna Choa. You know, it's sort of single artist events and exhibitions, but a little bit more involved and certainly more planning than the ones that are like one-night events. And then those we have a couple of different series for these quicker, more nimble types of activities, and you know, we can do anything from 10 to 20 of those a year. So at this point in time, we've done about over like 50 or so projects at this point. So we're pretty.
How many of these are in the LA area, and how many of them are outside Southern California?
Most of them have been in Los Angeles. I mean, again, as we are a very new organization, it's really important to kind of establish an identity. I mean, there's just so much to be developed, like everything from our identity in the world, the internal structure, the organizational structure, how we were working with artists, fundraising, so on and so forth. So it was pretty deliberate that we wanted to be more established in Los Angeles as our hub. But we've done, you know, like I said, we did this actually it was like a year-long project in Marfa, and we did a major exhibition in Miami, and we've done smaller things in Texas, in Austin, Texas, and then in New York and things like that. But as we go, the notion is that it will continue to expand. I mean, that's the idea of the nomadic aspect of the title, is that it can be wherever, because we have no one space, it can be wherever the opportunity or the idea or, you know, the desire comes in. So
I don't feel like there's a lot of really specifically similar other models. I mean, there's some that are loosely, you know, divergent from mainstream normal activity. I want to go back to the money thing again. So you're a not-for-profit.
Yes.
And somebody has to raise money for these events.
Yeah, that would be me and the other 2 staff members. But
so are you usually raising money for a specific project as opposed to the dowry?
We have a kind of combinatory approach, which a lot of small organizations do. We tend to have like one major gala or benefit or auction, whatever model it is for that year. But one major thing that the goal of that is to establish the bulk of like the basic operating budget and just kind of standard, you know, amounts of things. And then when we have larger projects, we need to fundraise for those very specifically. So that's from both, and that's like both grant areas, which we're now finally eligible for, that we've been around for 3 years, and then individual solicitation and cultivation. And corporate as well, which comes in and out. Like sometimes it's really an ideal scenario, and quite often we turn down corporate sponsorship because it comes with like a lack of understanding of what it really means. So, but yeah, the fundraising is certainly takes up the bulk of the time. Not as much as like the first 2 years, obviously, because we were also establishing our identity and trying to figure out how we wanted the team structure to work, and there was just a lot of that kind of logistical development to be done.
So you're spending more time on fundraising now than you are with artists?
I would say it's like half and half. It's just that when I was at the Whitney, it was like 80% running the organization, running the parts and the artists, and maybe a little bit of fundraising. But now it's probably it's hard to say. Maybe it's like 1/3 each, because I did hire one of my team members. Whose specific responsibility is development as well. So while everybody does a bit of everything, you just can't get around that in an organization this size, she has a very specific charge to develop our development. In other words, membership and kind of cultivation and things like that. So as we go forward, the idea is that I'll do less and less of it, even though.
How do these of the larger kinds of projects you're taking on, how are they visualized? How do they come to you? What's the genesis? Are you creating them? Somebody's coming to you? What are the variables?
It's interesting because the general, there's two basic ways. One, there's a venue that's offered to us. So in the case, and the other obviously is that there's a project or an idea I have that's either coming from a conversation with one artist or a curatorial idea I've just been developing, and then we go and find the venue. Sometimes it happens, for example, with this show at the bank that we're just taking down right now, we were offered this beautiful historical building at the same time that I was starting to think about doing a painting show, and it clicked in my head that they made sense together. That happened to happen simultaneously. In other cases, like an artist like Katie Grinnan, for example, we did a project. It's still ongoing, actually, but the first part of the project was a very specific idea about doing a performance in a place called the Integratron in Joshua Tree. And so we went and made that specifically happen in that case. In other cases, artists have ideas, and then I start to think about how they could be applied in the public realm in a new way, or something that could appeal to their sensibility. In one case, it was an artist's films that were done on, they call them Videotrons. They're like moving image billboards on Sunset Boulevard. And he had never thought about doing it that way, but when I thought of it or saw it and proposed it to him, he got very excited about how that could give him a different kind of presentation, a way to access other aspects of the work that was different than showing it in an installation. So, honestly, it really, you have to be, in my mind, I think the most important thing is to be open to thinking about all things as potential projects, in all places as potential projects, because otherwise you can get, it's too easy to get like stuck in like, oh, and then we take, every time we do it, we take an abandoned strip mall and we do that, or we do this same parking lot thing every time. I mean, it has to be like each time. So for right now, we're pretty determined not to repeat any venues or types of venues even for a while, so we can kind of really feel like we're being as expansive as possible. So that's helpful.
Yeah, what I'm wondering is it seems to me that California in total has more venues, more outdoor atypical art exhibition opportunities than most of the rest of the country. And I'm wondering if this is perhaps a new mode, from less pop art, less art. Pop art is the stuff that just goes to a gallery as opposed to the site-specific commissions and the interaction, etc. And, all right, I've got more, but you want to respond to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely think, I definitely think one of the reasons I wanted to be in Los Angeles versus New York is that New York has, it has less opportunity to explore different ways of presenting things because the structure is so established already. So definitely I think Los Angeles has more opportunities. I don't know if I would say more than the rest of the country though, because I feel like there's a lot of great things like that's happening like all around California and the Southwest, and even like Texas and Florida. It's really at the end of the day something about space. It's a very large country, and it's one that's replete with like unusual, different landscapes, spaces, types of communities, and so on, and it just inherently has that possibility within it. So, LA may be the reason it feels like more, because there is, I would think of it as like, the second or third most established art city in the country. So you have some institutional structure to be thinking about this. So it feels like that, that, and then combined with the fact that there's a lot more open space and empty buildings basically at the end of the day that they can combine pretty nicely. But I do think it's a different, there's a lot more, one, it's much more accepted and understood for things to be site-specific and process-based, even like, evolve over time and not be just like a single thing or a single object that gets placed somewhere. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just like a particular mode and way of practice and type of practice that I think has become much more acceptable is not the right word, but more people can wrap their heads around it, I guess.
I like it. I mean, I think part of it is people can encounter it without specifically going to see it. That they can encounter it in their daily life, and that art becomes something that's more integrated into normal activity as opposed to something you go to see. But then I'm wondering about the economic base of it. I mean, how are the artists that you're participating with, are they making money doing this?
Well, no artist makes money from a not-for-profit. I mean, at the end of the day, that's not directly. But the idea is that if you're able to give artists an opportunity to elaborate their voice and have more visibility, and presumably, if you're lucky, more press, more awareness of who they are, what they do, then that directly relates to their presence in the market. And in general, that's the case.
No, yeah, I know, I get that totally, but that still means that they need to do something more normal as a means of earning money than just doing large-scale, outdoor, unsaleable work.
Right. No, that's true. I mean, basically, our policy is that we cover all production, and when we can, we give fees, but it's not always possible. It depends on the project and what kind of funding we have for it. But yeah, certainly they don't. It's not, I mean, like, for example, this painting show, everything in it, everyone is selling, but I mean, we're not, but they're selling it through their gallery, because those are, almost all of those have an opportunity. Like, there's a couple of them that had to be destroyed, taking them down. They were very site-specific, but by and large, they provided the opportunity for actual saleable work for those artists. But generally, the kinds of projects we do are not about something. They are required to have some other way of selling their work to sustain those kinds of practices. But I mean that's true no matter what. At least my thought is, at least this gives them some outlet, some venue for the work that their gallery isn't going to want to support because it's not saleable, And then the gallery usually then, they're happy to have us do it so that they can then point to that and then sell the work themselves.
Totally. Yeah, easy for them. Do you work with artists sometimes who do not have galleries?
Yeah, here and there. And the thing is, that's interesting is a lot of them tend to be artists who've been, it's usually a temporary situation, but often artists who've been working for quite a while and they just left one gallery and they just aren't in any big rush to I think they feel more empowered in managing their own lives and existences than maybe was previously the case. But also conversely, really, really young artists almost always have galleries immediately, in a way that even when I started, this wasn't that long ago, it just wasn't the case, So it's interesting how people get picked up a lot more quickly, but they also are more comfortable. It doesn't mean anything definitively if you don't happen to work at the gallery at that time or in that city.
When you left the Whitney, would you have stayed at the Whitney if the funding had continued? And it's hard to predict what you would have done, but I guess I would say there was no one reason that was so much more so than the others. So if one thing had been different, it's possible that I would have been happy to stay. I love the Whitney. It was I grew up there. It was not leaving because I hated it or anything like that. It was really much more how long I'd been there, what I was hoping to accomplish, and whether that was possible there. Some personal shifts in my family life, and then just this excitement of the idea of starting something of my own. And so all of these things sort of happen at the same time. Yeah, but I'm asking because I wonder how long the natural longevity with land is for you. I feel fairly comfortable that 4 years isn't enough.
No, certainly not.
But 20 is too many. maybe.
It's also, well, I mean, I mean, my goal for land is that it becomes its own organization, and whoever is the director is the director. The way, if you think about, you know, LACE or I'm trying to think of something, a smaller organization like Artist Space or something like that. You know, they exist now. The person who founded them is no longer the only person who could run it. Right. At this point in time, I don't think that's the case for land. I still think it has to be me. But the goal and everything I'm trying to do with strategically planning our infrastructure and administration, all the stuff that sounds really boring, but I think is about how organizations can truly last. The goal is that it doesn't need to be. It's supposed to be about the idea and the mission, and at the end of the day. So I really feel quite confident that will happen because it was pretty clear from the start that that's what we want.
How many curatorial minds are making decisions for land?
I'm still curating everything, but my staff is very, I mean, we're around each other like 24 hours a day. I mean, I pretty much don't, there's nobody in this town I know better than especially the two most full-time folks, and you know, we used to have three, but he, for whatever reason, he's not working with us anymore. But any case, but everybody works there. You have to be invested in it and feel like sort of proprietary about it to some degree, or you couldn't get the things done we have to get done. It's like a lifestyle more so than just a job. It just doesn't work to treat it like a job. The requirements are so, I mean, you work crazy hours and do all kinds of weird things, like go on road trips together across the country to take pictures of billboards and things like that. So it really has to be a team. It can't be. So that I mention that because I feel that our conversations and their thoughts and their ideas do resonate in my decisions. But technically, I curate everything.
Do you have
that to change?
I'm sorry, say it again.
I would like that. I mean, I'm very open to that changing. If anyone has an idea, they're always welcome to give it, you know, to send it my way. And I expect that to start happening more and more as they're relatively young staff, and that was also intentional. So I really wanted them to be able to develop a work ethic and a way of doing things that, you know, from scratch, not have to kind of start someone over.
Do you have ongoing relationships with the artists with whom you've worked after a project is over?
Almost always, yeah. Because especially when they're, you know, individual commissions, but it's super, the relationships I have with the artists are the most critical thing to me. I mean, that's where all of my, you know, all of the thoughts and ideas that I like to think that I pull together through a curatorial lens come from. I mean, that's where, you know, I get a sense of what people are thinking about, or pick out the, you know, the common threads that jump out. If you're not spending time with your artists, then you're not going to know that stuff. I mean, you're just going to be making it up and applying a theory, which I think some people do quite often, and it's unfortunate. That's not curating.
Yes, a lot. I touched on them earlier, and I'll ask again. I mean, you don't feel like you're trying to make a particular voice or mark or statement with what you're curating by putting your stamp on it?
I mean, I feel like inevitably I have people say things like, I'll tell them about a project I'm doing, and they'll say things like, oh, that sounds very much like what a project you love, you know, like that sounds like you or whatever. So obviously there is some ongoing resonance, but I don't think it's like, you know, so clear that it would be such a specific type of work or even a specific way of working. I think it's like you develop a personality in your curatorial practice, just like you develop your actual personality. It's multifaceted, and it has a specific identity, but it's not one thing. I know that sounds a little vague, but I really feel like I feel like it's strange to say, like, I curate things like this, you know, or I am only interested in work that is, you know, approaches such and such ideas.
Oh, I totally agree, but some curators do that. And too many curators try and put artists into boxes that the artists don't want to be in.
No, totally. I mean, and of course that, you know, I think, you know, a curator, a good curator, good critic, good writer will often have ideas about the artwork that the artist may not agree with. But I think that's different than forcing, you know, like truly forcing the, you know, square peg into the round hole. One can speak about, you know, what you see in the artwork and have that not be just, you know, the artist's primary way of describing their own work, and it could still, I think, still be true and still be interesting. But there's also going too much in a direction where you just apply a notion to something and make it be that way, which I think is wrong. So again, it's like any kind of thesis of any kind. Like there's the subtlety of how you make your argument is really trying to understand the work as thoroughly as you can, and then shape it from what is there into like a cogent argument or presentation or communication, whatever that might be.
That seems appropriate.
I mean, I feel like most of the time it's very collaborative with artists I work with, because it's important to me that they feel, and you know, I can't think of, maybe once or twice I've worked with an artist who's so rigid about what they think and what they want it to be read as that it was complicated for me. Most of the time, some of the best part is that the whole thing is a conversation from the beginning, and obviously the central genesis is them and their idea, but at the end of the day, like especially commissioned projects, it's kind of a bit more like a movie. Like every part of it changes the project. Like the venue changes the project, the limitations change the project, the money changes the project, who other people involved and what they can help realize change the project. And of course, the artist is the center of it, but it's an organism of sorts that kind of works together. So it seems pretty critical to me that you have like a, you know, reciprocity in your conversation. And I've always felt like if you have respect and with how you talk things through and have your opinions, it usually makes it better at the end of the day.
Let's open this up to questions in a moment or two. You guys start raising your hands. I got like one or two left. Mundane question. Do you think about gender and race or culture in curating shows?
I do. I would say probably of those, I think most about gender, because it's odd for somebody who considers herself really conscious of that, how easy it is to like lose track of it and suddenly be like, what the fuck, why do I have like only 10 guys in this show? I don't know how that happened. But I hesitate to like overly deliberately make it about gender or culture or ethnicity, because I think that can be ghettoizing in its own way. So I try very hard to think about it overall so that it would just be present in the like proper ways, you know what I mean, like when you're doing it. I want it to be internalized, not deliberate, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's how it should be also. I agree with you, but yeah. And then sometimes you can do
it. Doesn't mean you don't have to pay attention. I mean, you have to be very conscious of yourself and be self-aware, but like how you then, your next actions and how that happens are where you can fix it. So.
Somebody has asked me to ask a biennial question. What are the different ways that curators have gone about assembling contestants? I mean, exhibitors.
You know, every 2 years, it's such a huge thing, or at least it has been throughout the time I was at the Whitney. I think before that, it was not, I mean, earlier on in the biennial history, it was a little simpler because the format was, one, not as prevalent and pretty clear the way that they handled it. I think of recent years, the goal was really to try to, I think the term we always like to say is to like take the temperature of the, you know, contemporary art world, because of course no one, especially with the proliferation of, you know, communication, other biennials, the globalization of the art world, all of these things, it's just ludicrous to pretend you're actually doing some kind of comprehensive survey. I mean, no one would even pretend that that's what they're doing. So at the end of the day, the biennial has now become, I think, like the curator's theme show. They just rarely put a articulated theme out there. I mean, that's all it is. It's a full museum theme show, what you think is interesting in the art world at that point.
But specifically, are artists applying, or are you guys going out and finding?
I would say more the latter. I mean, one would hope that any contemporary curator being asked to work on the biennial is already doing that at all times anyway, and has like you know, a friend of mine used to say, like, pretty much stop any contemporary curator on the street and they have a biennial in their head.
Yeah.
They would, and you should. I mean, that's your job, to be looking and thinking, like, collectively as well as individually. But that said, everything that we get hundreds and hundreds of submissions. It's the Whitney's policy, which is not true of every other show of this nature, to accept all submissions, and they are seen. They're not always, every one of them is not seen by a biennial curator, but it's always seen by someone on the curatorial team. So quite often it's given to junior curators to, it's a great way for them to, you know, start to develop their own way of looking at art and really having some sense of selection and so on and so forth, and then they would bring theirs, you know, additional selections to us from that, pulled from that. So that was a way that we could keep the submission process open, but also make it, like, realistic, that we would actually address all of this.
Cool. Let's take some questions. Brian, go ahead. You're first.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, in regards to this wasn't really the question I wanted to ask, but now I want to ask it. In regards to the biennial, is it problematic that it's not really clear if it's like a survey of what is going on in the U.S. or whether it's the curator's perspective? Like, I kind of felt that murky ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of why every 2 years it's this ginormous internal conversation, and it's because it's evolved. It's not been the same thing ever. Like, each time it's happened, it's become. It necessarily should be something slightly different because it's dealing with a, you know, 2 years later world, and when it should be reactive to that. But the fact that, I mean, I think the fact that it's not a survey has been true for so long, because there's no possible way you could expect even, you know, professional curators who do it all the time to be able to say, I've seen everything in this country and this is the best thing that there is. It's much more like you have to do as much due diligence as you can to feel that you're having a grasp on the broadest spectrum that you can, but at the end of the day, you have to make some kind of parameter, some kind of decision on, you know, what kind of work you're going to focus on or what thematics are most interesting to you, whether or not you end up articulating it, like, as a title or something like that. So I actually don't think it's problematic. I think it's really the only responsible way to handle it, and that you can't really just purport to do otherwise would just be false. Like, it would be, you would just be presenting an image that's not true.
I guess the sense that I got was that it was like the curators weren't necessarily owning the space, so it still felt like it was like a Whitney space that was showing this kind of huge spectrum, but at the same time, the curators' voices were there, and there wasn't like a pronouncement of the roles there.
No, I think that's definitely also more contemporary thing. I mean, there's definitely an evolution in institutional practice from the sort of authoritative voice that's just the museum voice to acknowledging the more subjective individual aspects of curatorial work. And I think that's been a relatively recent development just in the institutional world in general. And I think it's a great thing because it keeps, one, I think it diminishes the sort of feeling of there being this big, you know, omnipresent voice that tells you what is important, to thinking about it just like any other, you know, academic pursuit or intellectual pursuit, that there are individual minds that play and trajectories and, you know, at the end of the day, interests. Much of it would be that about like someone writing a book or someone creating a film or so on and so forth. And so I think it's a good thing that that the art world or that curators are understood to be more within that idea of development, as opposed to again, like just a singular authoritative voice. You guys are all kind of, can you guys hear me? Because you're all frozen now, in my view.
We can hear you okay.
Okay.
Sometimes that happens. Sabine, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can't hear you now. I just heard you say, can you hear me?
Wait a minute. You are now unmuted. Go ahead. Nope, you remuted yourself. I'll do it. I'll do it. Hold still. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Shamim.
Hi there.
I have a general question. Here in Northern Europe, you know that we have a lot of museums. And whether you go to a museum in Hamburg or in Munich or somewhere in Belgium, they all show very similar artists. So you go there and you see a Joseph Beuys, and you have the Olaf for Iliasson. You have it's like all the museums are chasing the same artist. And what I've seen in America, it's very similar. Why is that? Why aren't they more different to each other? Why don't they try to have a profile?
You're breaking up a lot.
Yes?
You're breaking up a lot, but I think I have the case to your question.
Okay.
Okay, I was going to suggest
the similarity of all the museums that irritates me.
I think I have the gist of your question, even though you broke up a little bit in there. You know, why that is, I mean, if I want to be mean about it, is because people tend to be conformist about things, about ideas, about selectivity, about value, about quality. I think that it's easier to kind of go, sometimes one aspect of it is that it can be easier to kind of follow the group that is sort of general consensus around, and kind of keep working with that. You know, to be perfectly honest, it's as complicated as, you know, intellectual conformity down to funding conformity, sometimes trustee pressure. There's so many aspects that push you to do the things that other people recognize, know, and that can be even within the very high-end intellectual art community. There's still a kind of group of artists and ways of working with them that is, you know, like we have all our little nicknames for those things too. You know, like we recognize that's happening. Like, oh, it's that particular, I don't want to say what they are exactly, but like, oh, it's that group of, you know, so-and-so curator type things. And, you know, there are different selections of them, different circles, but they still exist, you know. And, but on one hand, I find it a little distressing because it can be very exclusive or take away chances from, you know, other ways of thinking, other artists and so on. But I also think it's important to, like, you know, look at what those different circles are, because I don't think it's just one anymore. I mean, there is a kind of international circle that is very particular, but there's also, you know, other sort of descriptive selections, and looking at why those exist, because they will continue to exist, is also interesting to me. Like, I mean, there are reasons that people get behind certain types of groups of artists as well. So it's not all like a dismissive thing, but sometimes it can go. I have to disagree a little bit. I have to disagrey a little bit because when I visit museums, I do that a lot on shows. And the top end of our museum, then now get closer. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but it breaks up. A lot of words are missing.
Oh,
Go ahead and try. Let's see what happens.
Okay, well then I'll try to. It's just that at the top end of the artist's market, it's always the same that are hanging there. And it's not, I'm not talking from the point of view of the artist and whether they get a chance to put their stuff in the museum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. It's the viewer as well. I'm savvy in art. You know, I know a lot. I know a lot of artists. I know where they come from. And I go in there and it's like the big boutiques in cities. They're always the same shops in the middle of the cities, and it's always the same artists in the museum. And it's, you know, for somebody who goes there, you think, oh, okay, that's him again next to her, and it seems such a pity, especially in the circle of artists, where one thinks, you know, they're trying to do something different to wake you up, you know, to confront you. But I guess with the biennales and things like that, you can do that on that side. It's just the museums that seem to be very, very conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can't underestimate, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but you can't underestimate the pressure of the market system these days, and how that impacts like their boards and things like that. It's never, the market has never had the kind of strength that it has and power over not-for-profits that it does now, and it's very distressing to me. Increasingly so, actually, in the last 5 years. Like, it feels exponentially different. And I'm quite certain a lot of what you're talking about is pursuant to the power of the galleries who manage those artists and the trustees who want to see them there. And you can push really hard, but honestly, you have to have a lot of rigor and commitment to push against it all the time. And you can very easily, I mean, sometimes you have to make compromises. I mean, I feel very lucky that I wasn't in a senior level position at the Whitney where that happened to me. Like, my position had enormous amounts of creative freedom for an institutional curator, to be honest. And I know that had I stayed and become a senior curator there, I would not be in that position to the same degree. Interestingly, you get more restricted the farther along you get in institutions, I think. I think directors have the worst of it, you know. And so I'm not excusing that situation, but I don't think it's just that museums have no imagination or anything like that. I think that there are very real, practical, logistical issues that happen, and sometimes they just can't all hold up against it, you know. And I think they get given more than they should. I definitely think museums are much more conservative of late than I would like to see. Very much so in America, I think, and I can speak less confidently about Europe, but it does seem to be the case there too. So, you know, I mean, I don't really have the solution, to be perfectly honest. I've been very disappointed with a lot of museum programming recently, and even though they're good shows, they just don't seem to be, quite often they're very good shows, they just don't seem to be trying to, I mean, I feel like curatorial work used to be understood that you try and fail, that it was okay to like have an idea and give it a shot and feel like something's happening but not know exactly how to articulate it and really work it out with that process. And I think mostly for money reasons, but for many other things, we live in a world that doesn't allow for that anymore. Everything has to be the blockbuster or the perfect second sophomore effort or whatever it is. There's just not that space to like fuck things up, which is a really critical part of what we all do. And so that's a broader scale issue I have. I think that's true not just in museums, but in like culture at large. But you know, in the galleries and so on and so forth, those kinds of pressures to be immediately and encapsulated one thing and always that or always better is unreasonable and stifling in many ways. So.
I mean, it's big galleries. Sorry, it's interesting that really big galleries like Gaussian, they only talk about it already very successful, and that kind of is you know, part go the way that they're conservative. Then you know, don't let's risk it. Let's take the really successful artists and you know make the bucks.
Yeah, no, completely, and that's what I mean about the market pressure being, you know, increasingly powerful that way, because they also then control the bulk of the money. I mean, philanthropy is like getting smaller and smaller as a even concept anyone understands every year. And I don't mean to sound so cynical, but this is probably the most cynical I've ever felt about that situation in my career. And maybe that's just you getting older and you have more history to watch. But, you know, I'd like to see, I feel like there needs to be some radical re-envisioning of how philanthropy can work. Otherwise, we're going to lose track of what's important about thinking independently, what museums are for, and artists, of course, having that opportunity.
Thank you both. Those are good points. Let's go to Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Go ahead.
I have a question. Are you open to talking to artists and hearing about proposals for ideas for land?
Yeah, I always am. I mean, we get proposals all the time. I mean, sometimes it takes me longer than others, depending on what else we're doing. Like, I can't always get to them right away, but I read everything I get. And at this point, I'm sorry?
Do you ever meet with artists, or are you mostly formal proposal, like formal submission?
No, I meet with artists all the time. So this is what I do. I mean, that's how I never ever have done anything that didn't involve like multiple meetings with the artists before I even thought about it. You know, went forward with it. I think that's pretty critical. But you know, sometimes it comes from like it's a recommendation from somebody, and I'll go do a studio visit. More often than not, I will say like it's usually my research and my process that gets me to that stage with someone, but it doesn't mean that when things come to me, whether they're via a friend or another artist I work with, or just a proposal outright, somebody I don't know, they do, you know, like I said, they are a part of the process for me as well.
Okay, thank you.
How influenced are you by what somebody asked, what art critics say, like Peter Frank or David Hickey?
How much am I influenced by them? Is that what you said?
Yeah, at all?
I like to stay abreast of all the opinions out there, and some people I think I just naturally appreciate more than others, or not naturally, I guess it's a learned appreciation because it's similar to ideas I care about. But I don't really care what, like, I don't make my decisions based on whether they would like it or not. I mean, of course I love getting good press, don't get me wrong, it always makes me happy. Like Christopher Knight finally gave us a great review for the painting show, and he's such a curmudgeon that was pretty exciting, but I didn't do the show in the hopes that Christopher Knight would write a good review, you know? But I will say I don't have as much time as I used to have, like, to read, like, current theory and so on and so forth, so it's, I sometimes feel like my ideas come more from, you know, literature or what I'm reading or interested in science at the moment. I mean, it's more sociological to me than specifically about the art critic conversation. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. Cool, thanks. Let's take two more questions. That's Judith and then Kinga. Judith, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
A little bit? Am I breaking up? Everyone else goes So my question revolves more around exposure. So at a certain point, and probably a lot of the people on this call's career, we have similar backgrounds, meaning we have an art degree, we have gallery representation, and we've won a number of awards and other things, or especially in my own case. My question is more about, are there certain types of activities you would recommend which really would propel the career into a higher strata? So are there any tips that you could give us that would be really directed at the baseline of the art careers there, but how do we really elevate that?
I mean, I don't think there's any one answer to that, but I definitely do feel that it's always seemed to me, and watching other curators and artists, so on, that if they develop like an ongoing or longer lasting relationship with the people that they work with, I mean, whether it's sometimes it's their dealer, but there are fewer and fewer of those kind of true invested dealers out there, in my opinion. Like with, you know, when you were first starting out, be like your mentor, but as you go on, your colleagues that you get along with, that your curators you've worked with, that you really like, staying in touch with them. I think those kinds of conversations, it just, you know, at the end of the day, this is going to sound really simplistic, but sometimes it's really just about making sure people don't forget to think of you. And it's, and I say that not because any single artist is forgettable, but just because there are so many things, so many opportunities, so many ways you could do a show, one could do a show, or institution could go in programming that just to stay present and in conversation with the people who might be working in the area that you would like to see your work go. It's not, I don't mean it's like they're doing you a favor, I just mean like that's how you keep the conversation alive and present. You know what I mean? Because I can certainly understand the feeling of, okay, this doesn't make, you know, sometimes feeling like, oh, this doesn't make sense. I have all the right, you know, I did all the right awards. I have this many shows under my belt. I have all this strong work. I sell pretty well, whatever, why is this next thing not happening, whatever it might be that you're looking for or hoping for. And sometimes I think it's just forcing yourself to be like, okay, I need to call that person again one more time and just talk to them about my idea or what I'd like to see, because it should be natural, but it's not systematic with art work, you know, so it doesn't follow that way.
Well, that was part of the question, it didn't seem like it was linear necessarily in other, you know, professional areas. There are steps that you take, and essentially they'll guarantee more or less a certain type of income, a certain visibility. And whereas art is uncharted territory, and definitely I feel that the leap between having a gallery, having collectors, having interest, which is all great. I'm not, you know, in any way negating the importance of that, but it's how do you leverage that and take it into something that is, you know, truly sustainable. So meaning, you know, how do you get into the Whitney Biennial and then you get that level of exposure?
I mean, I wish I thought that there was a way to do that so that all of these like talented, hardworking folks involved in art world are able to have things be reliable to some degree without taking away some of the things that are best about the art world to me still, which is that strange trajectories happen and there isn't one path. And, you know, I think about it, you know, we all think about it because we have to take care of our own livelihoods and our you know, sanity and all of the things that we need to protect as well. But, you know, I also look at, like, my brother is a partner in a law firm, and literally everything he did happened exactly the way he planned it to be. And in a million freaking years, I would never want that to be my life. And there's nothing wrong with it that he's happy with it, but it's just the predictability of it was one of the reasons he did it. That was priority to him. For me, would I like things to be absolutely certain that in 2 years, like, land is going to make this amount of money and so on and so forth? Yeah, I certainly would, but the best I can do is an educated and rigorous guess at it. And that's and that I would imagine is quite similar, even more so for an artist's path. But then I know that this sounds like a cop-out answer, but I really don't think you can have one without, like, you can have it both ways. I just don't believe that works that way. Like, risk-taking comes, being able to think your own way and do things your own way comes with a lack of perfect stability and predictability. And I sort of think they can't be otherwise, unfortunately. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have to suffer with this too, so I'm not trying to sound like, whatever, that's the way it is, don't you worry. But,
and we all want the silver bullet and all of that. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's interesting hearing your perceptions. So, thanks.
That's good, thank you. We're actually running a little long, but I said we'd do one more question, so let's take King and then we'll end it. Kinga, go ahead.
A couple of the themes or that you actually feel very strongly about?
I'm sorry, could you say it again?
Can you discuss a couple of the themes or ideas that you feel very strongly about?
So some of the things that I have, I think it would be easier for me to say some of the things that I have worked very deeply with, because right now I have to say this is hard for me to say without it coming out wrong. I don't yet feel like the there of what's going on right now. Like, it feels a bit unfocused and scattered and not in a good way right now, overall. And it doesn't mean I don't love individual artists. I'm talking about when I'm looking at it more like larger scale analytically, like what are things that I think are coming out of culture that a lot of artists are looking at from different angles, but in a similar way. that I'm not feeling what that is right now. It feels a little still like unfocused. So, you know, previously I was really like when I did the 2008 biennial, and this is still something I think about a lot, but I was writing a lot about this dispersal of practice being reflective of our more sort of fragmented culture approach to history and time, both from what's successful about that as well as what's really problematic. And I still think that that's a really resonant theme, that people are grappling with the idea of sort of essentially kind of like multiple timelines, multiple existences. All of this you can see reflected in technology and science and other aspects of popular culture. And it gives the opportunity to work against a singular cause and effect linear history, which I think is really valuable, but it also can be very decentralizing and just allow for like a sort of central identity in the world in a way that I think people struggle with in their lives all the time, and that artists are really starting to speak about a lot earlier. So that's something I've been really interested in, and how that's tied very directly to developments in science and technology and so on. And, you know, previous to that, I was really fascinated by, and again, this is like via popular culture as well as the art that I saw addressing this earlier on, the obsession with like the allegorical, monstrous narrative, the dark side of things. So I was calling it the New Gothic at the time, as a way to deal with you know, sublimated fears and concerns about contemporary culture. I feel like that had, you know, that's a little bit earlier of a moment. It's not as prevalent now, but it was a very significant part that I think people were dismissing as sort of escapist or adolescent or so on and so forth. It was actually a really profound, like allegorical approach to the world. It seems so strange to me that that's the way, you know, historically art is often handled, the most troubling aspects of society. So, you know, those are a couple of things that I've spent a lot of time writing, thinking about in the past, and hopefully I'll be able to tell you what that will be for my next round soon enough. But you know, we'll see how it goes forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Let's wrap this up, Shamim. You are a wealth of information, and all of a sudden I feel like we should go for another hour. But we're going to let you off.
I'm expecting my dinner guest any minute. So.
Awesome. All right. Well, this has been great. I'm going to unmute everybody. I really appreciate you sharing all this information and the vulnerability and the knowledge that you shared. It's great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for taking the time. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.